Every house had the summer it remembers by what got built. The man who lived there walked out into the yard one warm evening, looked at the empty corner or bareback wall, and already saw the finished thing where the dirt was. We were the kids who heard the plan at supper. Some of us grew into the men who would announce one of our own someday. The deck off the kitchen door, or the swing set in the back corner, or the patio he swore he could pour himself. Whatever it turned out to be, it took over the garage and the driveway, and it ate up the Saturdays from June clear into August. Nobody in the house got that ground back until the work was done. This is the story of those summers, the way we actually lived them. The announcement. It usually started with a long look at the yard. Late springs, the grass green again, the man of the house out on the back step with a cup of coffee going cold in his hand, already seeing the finished thing where the bare ground sat. By the time he said anything out loud, he had built the whole project 3 times in his own head. The timing was almost always the same. It came once the last frost was gone and the evenings stretched long enough to work after supper. Maybe a neighbor had finished his own deck the summer before, and that had been eating at him all winter. Maybe a tax refund had come in. Whatever lit the fuse, by Memorial Day the idea had hardened into a plan, and a man who had been quiet about it for months would not stop talking about it for the next 3. Then it became official. Over supper, or behind the Sunday paper, or leaning on a fender while a neighbor pretended to listen, he laid it out. This was the summer the deck went in off the kitchen door. This was the summer the swing set finally got sunk in the back corner, the one the kids had been after since Easter. For some men, it was the patio they were sure they could pour for half of what a contractor wanted. For others, it was the old boat hauled out of the side yard and made right before the lake opened up. We all knew the look that came with it. There was a certainty in his voice that the calendar would spend the next 3 months arguing with. The plan was always bigger than the budget. The budget was always smaller than the job. Somehow, that never once stopped a man from starting. Did not much matter what he did the rest of the year. The fellow who fixed transmissions all week and the fellow who sat behind a desk both turned into the same man come late May, squinting at a corner of the yard with their hands on their hips. A summer project was a way of saying something a man could not say out loud. That he could provide. That he could make a thing with his own 2 hands that his family would use for years. None of that ever got spoken. It just got built. For us kids, that one sentence reshaped the whole summer. It meant the garage was about to turn into a workshop and the car would live out in the driveway for weeks. It meant Saturdays had a purpose now, whether we wanted one or not. We would get handed a tape measure or a push broom and told to make ourselves useful. We grumbled about it. We showed up anyway because something was happening out there and we wanted to be near it. There was one more sign, the surest of them all. Out came the sawhorses. He would drag them from the back of the garage, where they had spent all winter buried under coiled hose and empty paint cans, knock the dust off the tops, and stand them up square in the middle of the driveway. Folded open and bare, they did not look like much of anything yet. But every house on the block could read the signal. Somebody's father had a project, and the whole street would know about it before it was done. First, though, before a single board got cut, the thing had to be drawn. drawn on graph paper. Somewhere in the house there was a magazine, with one corner folded down. Popular Mechanics, most likely, or Popular Science, or a beat-up Mechanics Illustrated, that had been riding around in the truck for a month. Inside was the project, laid out in an exploded diagram with every board numbered and a materials list running down the side. Men did not dream these builds up out of nothing. They borrowed them from the same few pages the whole country was reading. If the magazine would not do, there was the plan book. Popular Mechanics put one out called Planning Your Home Workshop back in 1949, and Popular Science sold a whole do-it-yourself encyclopedia by the middle of the 1950s, the kind of set that lived on a basement shelf and got pulled down every June. A man copied what he needed onto graph paper at the kitchen table after the dishes were cleared, pencil behind his ear, ruler sliding across the little blue squares. We would lean on the table and watch it happen. There was something steadying in the way he worked the pencil. Erased, blew the crumbs off, started a line over. He was no draftsman, and the drawing showed it, but it did not have to be pretty. It only had to be close enough to cut from. A boy learned more about how a thing got made on those quiet kitchen table evenings than in any shop class, because this one was real, and it was going into the actual backyard he played in. That graph paper was where the dreaming got serious. 4 squares to the foot, give or take, and all at once the deck had a shape and the swing set had a footprint. He would figure the lumber straight off the drawing, write the numbers in the margin, total them up, then total them again because the first sum could not possibly be right. And the kid took it all in. The figuring was the part you would carry the rest of your life, though nobody called it that. The arithmetic, the planning ahead, the habit of measuring twice before cutting once. A man doing a chore at a kitchen table was a trade being handed over, one quiet evening at a time. The budget that came out of all that figuring was a hopeful document. So was the timeline. 2 weekends, he would say, maybe 3. He believed it when he said it, and so did we, because the drawing made it look so easy. Every line was straight on graph paper. Every corner was square. Nothing had warped yet. Nothing had split. And the hardware store had not yet told him they were out of the one part he needed. He taped that drawing up on the garage wall, or weighed it down on the bench with a coffee cup, and there it stayed all summer, going greasy and sun-faded and marked up as the real job pulled away from the paper one. But on the night he drew it, it was perfect. It stayed nothing but ink and blue squares, though, until somebody hauled home the wood. The run to the lumberyard. Saturday morning meant loading up before the day got hot. The back seat folded flat, or the tailgate dropped, and a couple of moving blankets were thrown down so the bed would not chew up the good boards. We rode along because going along was half the fun, and because an extra set of hands meant one fewer trip. The yard he drove to was nobody's warehouse. This was before the big orange box turned buying lumber into a sport. Back then, it was the local lumber yard at the edge of town, or the hardware store on the square, and the man behind the counter knew the stock cold, and usually knew your father by name. You told him what you were building, and he walked you back into the racks himself, pulling boards, sighting them down their length for a crown or a twist, setting the bad ones aside without a word. Our job on those trips was to carry, to stay out of the way, and to not let go of the cart on the slope of the lot. We watched a thing that ran on trust. He paid, or sometimes he ran a tab, and the counterman wrote it in a book. Nobody scanned anything. Nobody asked for a card. You knew the place, and the place knew you. He took his time over the wood, and so did we, because picking it was the first real decision of the whole build. He would sight down a 2x4 with one eye shut and set it back if it had a bow in it. He would knock on a sheet of plywood to hear whether it rang true. A green board would twist on you by August and pull every nail it held. And the man at the counter knew it too, so between the two of them they sent home a load that would stand. Nobody was in a hurry. The radio behind the counter played the ball game. Somebody's dog slept across the doorway. Home Depot did not open its first doors until 1978. And it took most of the 1980s for the warehouse to swallow the corner yard. For the heart of these summers, the wood came from a place that smelled like a place, all fresh-cut pine and creosote, with the dust of 100 sawn ends hanging in the light. What rode home in the truck depended on the job, redwood or cedar, for a deck that had to stand out in the weather, because those held up without much help. Framing lumber and a sheet or two of plywood for nearly everything else. A brown paper sack of galvanized nails so they would not rust and bleed down the face of the work. Lag bolts, hinges, and a box of screws. And for anything going into the ground, a bag or two of sacrite or quikrete, riding low in the bed, heavy as a sleeping dog. The smell of that cut pine rode home with us the whole way, in through the windows, soaked into the blankets. By the time we pulled into the driveway, the morning was half gone and the day was hot, and the real work had not even started. He backed the truck up close. The two of us unloaded it board by board, and the stack went down right there beside the sawhorses, square, fragrant, and full of promise. That pile could become almost anything. That summer, it became one of a familiar handful of things. What got built. Some of it went into the ground and never moved again. That was the kind of build a man took the most pride in, the one that would still be there long after he was. Some things you make get used up and tossed out by fall. The summer project was meant to outlast the season, and the best of them outlasted the man. Here they are, the builds of an American summer, named the way you would point them out to a stranger walking the block. The backyard deck came off the kitchen door, a flat platform of redwood or treated pine where there had been nothing but a step and some mud. By the time these summers were rolling, the deck had gone from a rich man's notion to a thing half the street was building, one weekend at a time. The swing set went in the back corner, and the good ones got sunk in concrete so a hard summer of kids could not tip them over. Tubular steel, painted bright, a couple of swings, a slide, and maybe a glider built for two, ordered out of the Sears or the J.C. Penney catalog, or hauled home in a long, flat box. Stand in that backyard on a Saturday in those years, and the whole neighborhood was building at once. A saw whined 2 doors down. Up the block, a hammer kept time. Somebody's air compressor kicked on and off all afternoon. Half the street was chasing the same dream on the same weekends. Every man bent over his own pair of sawhorses, and not one of them thought of it as anything but an ordinary July. It went a little different house to house, the way these things always did. In a working man's yard, the deck might be low and plain, and built to hold a grill and a couple of lawn chairs. A few streets over it might run 2 levels with a bench around the rim. Same idea, different budget, and every one of them started with the same man and the same drawing taped to the same garage wall. Then there was the patio he poured himself. He would dig it out, frame it up, mix bag after bag of sacrite in a wheelbarrow with a hoe until his shoulders gave out, and screed it level with a straight 2x4 and a lot of muttering under his breath. It never came out as flat as he wanted. It lasted 40 years anyway. Plenty of garages wore a basketball backboard up over the door. He bolted it to the wall with lag bolts long enough to find solid wood, set the rim at 10 feet because that was the rule, and turned the driveway into a court. A tattered backboard still hung on the garage of Larry Bird's boyhood home down in French Lick, Indiana, and there were 100,000 more just like it on 100,000 ordinary streets, each one worth every bit as much to the kid shooting under the porch light. The list ran on from there. Some men built a picnic table heavy enough to seat the whole family, plus a few neighbors who turned up at the smell of charcoal. Others nailed together a doghouse with the dog's name painted over the little door. Plenty rebuilt the workbench along the garage wall, longer and stronger than the one before it, a row of pegboard hooks mounted behind. And more than a few spent the summer on the boat or the camper, going through it stem to stern so it would make the trip north come July. Whatever the job, the impulse underneath was the same: a man turning a free Saturday into something his family could put their hands on. A good share of those swing sets and decks and picnic tables were built from lumber treated with arsenic, the green-tinged kind that fought off rot for decades. We thought nothing of it then. The country quietly stopped selling it for backyard use at the end of 2003, once we understood it better. The structures outlasted the worry, which tells you something about how solidly the men had built them. None of it, though, put itself together. Every board on that list passed through the same set of tools and the same pair of hands. Every job on that list called for something specific off the pegboard. You learned to build by what it pulled down off the wall. A deck meant the circular saw screaming through a 2x4, sawdust kicking up in a rooster tail behind it. To every man who owned one, it was a Skilsaw, whatever the label actually read, because the Skilsaw Model 77 had been the saw that built America since 1937, and the name had simply taken over the whole idea of a portable saw. Most of those tools carried a history. The square might have been his own father's, the wood handle worn dark and smooth where a hand had gripped it for 40 years. A good tool got handed down because a good tool lasted, and lasting was the whole point of the thing. When he laid that worn square against a fresh corner, 2 generations were checking the same angle, and the boy holding the far end of the board was lined up to be the third. There was the level laid along a joist while everybody held their breath to see if the bubble sat dead center. The framing square for the corners. The post hole digger that bit into hard clay and gave back about a coffee can of dirt a minute on a good day. And then, the drill. Black & Decker put the first one built for a regular household on the market in 1946, a quarter-inch model that sold for $16.95. And they sold 1 million of them in 5 years, because every man in the country suddenly wanted to bore his own holes. By the time of these summers, that drill, or one of its grandchildren, hung on every pegboard in America. None of those tools were gentle. The saw had no guard worth the name on the older models, and a man kept all 10 fingers by paying close attention to it. We learned to respect those tools by watching him respect them, seeing how he set a board, where he kept his offhand, when he told us to back up a step. That was the real shop class, and the grade was permanent. But the tools were only half of it, and the smaller half at that. Around every one of these jobs was a crew, and the crew was the family. The kid got pressed into service to hold the board steady, knuckles white, certain he was about to lose a finger, getting barked at to quit wiggling it. That same kid would get sent in for the 3/8 bit and come back with the 1/4 inch, twice. A neighbor who actually understood concrete would wander over at the right moment, lean on the fence, and hand down the one piece of advice that saved the whole pour. And the screen door would bang as somebody's mother leaned out and called everyone in for lunch, always right when the glue was setting. Under the sawhorses, the sawdust had been piling up for weeks. The driveway had gone pale gray with it, ground into the concrete, swept into little drifts against the garage door that blew right back by evening. That dust was the proof of how much wood had already been cut, built up, torn out, and built again. The work belonged to the man. The summer belonged to the whole house. The plan, meanwhile, had promised 2 weekends. The calendar was about to have its 2 weeks past schedule. Nothing ever went the way the plan promised. The drawing was clean, and the yard was not. A board split right at the end and had to be cut over. A measurement came up short. The one bracket he needed turned out to be the one the hardware store was out of, which meant a second trip clear across town on a Saturday he had already spent. The magazine never mentioned any of that, and there was always the part that did not fit. The hole drilled a 1/2 inch off. The board cut to the wrong line because he read the tape upside down in the sun. He would stand there with his hands on his hips, looking at it the same way he had looked at the empty yard back in May. Except now, the look had some weather in it. Then he would work out the fix, because there was always a fix, and get back down on his knees. Then there was the weather itself. Rain would roll in on the one free afternoon he had carved out, and the half-built thing would sit under a tarp going soft while he watched it from the kitchen window. The deck that was supposed to take 2 weekends still had no railing when the calendar turned to August. The patio cured slow, while the whole family learned to walk the long way around it for the better part of a week. There was a stretch in the middle of every one of these projects where it honestly looked like it might never get done. The driveway stayed full, the car stayed out. Tools ended up in the house and got hollered about. Somewhere in there, the thing stopped being a fun idea and turned into a grind. And he kept at it anyway, because quitting was not something the men we are talking about knew how to do. Under all the grumbling, though, sat a thing nobody said out loud. Most of us did not really want it to end. The project was the summer. As long as it ran long, the garage stayed alive and the old man stayed out there with us in the evenings, handing down a tool, telling us to hold the light steady. And somehow, it always did get done. Then it stayed. Still standing. You could drive past the old house years later and see it from the road. The family inside had turned over 2 or 3 times, and the trees had filled in. But the work sat right where he left it. The swing set's legs were still set in their gray collars of concrete. The deck had gone soft and silver the way cedar does once it is weathered a couple of decades. Over the garage, the basketball rim hung bent from 1,000 kids who had swung on it, still bolted exactly where his lag bolts had bitten in. That was the quiet promise. Hiding under the whole business, the part the man never would have put into words. A summer project was a way of leaving something behind, something with real weight to it, a thing his family would lay hands on for 30 years without once thinking about the Saturday it cost him. The kids who held the boards grew up and moved out and moved off. Some of them worked out later, in their own garages, exactly what those summers had been about. You could have walked into that backyard and found the deck right where the burgers had cooked every 4th of July, and the picnic table the one the family ate at until the kids stood taller than the swing set itself. Nobody planned those things as heirlooms. They were the everyday furniture of a childhood, built by a man on his own time, out of his own pocket, with a kid at his elbow handing him the wrong bit. Every kid who grew up in one of those yards came away carrying the sound of it. There was the whine of the saw on a Saturday morning, the smell of sawdust and cut grass mixed in the heat, the sight of a father's back bent over the work with a pencil tucked behind his ear, too busy to be bothered. We did not know we were keeping any of it. It set in anyway, deep and meant to last, the same way the posts went down into the concrete. By the end of every one of those summers, the driveway told the rest of the story. The sawhorses came down at last. He would fold their legs, knock the worst of the sawdust off the tops, and lean them back against the garage wall in the spot where they lived between jobs. Somebody swept the gray dust off the concrete, and for the first time since May, the driveway was only a driveway again. The car came back inside. The street went quiet, and the thing he had made stood out there in the yard, finished, settling in for the long haul, already looking like it had always been there. Some of those men were gone now, and the work was still out there, standing in for them. A deck would hold up under a grandchild who never met the man who built it. A picnic table would seat a family that still told the story of who made it and when. That was about as much as any of us got to leave behind, and it was more than most. That was the part that got you, looking back. He had lived on through that deck, through that picnic table, through the rim still bolted over the door. Every time the family that was left gathered out there, they were standing on his Saturday. He had poured it into a thing the thing had held, and it was holding up a corner of somebody's life still. We grew up watching that happen and barely noticed it was a lesson. It was the best one some of us ever got. Go back to that yard one more time in your head and let the rest of it fall away. The man is not out there. The kids are grown and scattered. The car is in the garage and the driveway is clean. But the swing set is still standing in the back corner, its legs locked in concrete. He mixed himself one Saturday in June a long time ago. The paint has faded. One of the chains is gone. The seats hang a little crooked. None of that matters. It is standing right where he sank it, in a yard with no kids left in it. That is what the summer was for, when you get all the way down to it. A man looked at an empty corner and decided to fill it with something that would outlast the season, and then he did it, with a borrowed plan, a quarter-inch drill, and a kid who kept handing him the wrong bit. The grass grows up around the legs now. Nobody swings on it, and it stays, the way he built it to, holding its corner of the world long after the hands that made it have let go. You carry that picture out of here with you. Most of us already do.